Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. If you're like me, you're kind of finally getting your routine together. And by that, I mean, like, I'm not distracting myself as much, but definitely not on top of it as much as I could be. So for my report, a few things. So this week, the AVP for undergrad education interview finalist interviews are happening this week. Chief of Legislative Affairs Hoverzon sent y'all an email, I believe a couple days ago, with the information. So on Monday, Dr. Anderson had her interview. Today, Dr. Barrett had his, and then tomorrow, Dr. Gabrielson will have her interview. From 3:15 to 4 p.m., I believe, her schedule is slated to have an ASUW discussion. If anybody's available then, the link is on that email sent out, as I mentioned. You could join. It's just a chance to have a conversation, pretty light discussion with the candidates. Last 2 days, it's just been me, which is fine. But if anyone's available to make it, I don't like to hear myself talk a whole lot, so that'd be great if someone else wants to also have some input. And again, I can't speak for every student either. There's also some other information on the email regarding some unireg changes, as well as a proposal for a graduate degree or graduate program. So please give that a look. Give me some feedback if you have any for the graduate certificate or program. I can't remember what it is specifically. Feedback is due by the 17th. So basically just tell me if you like it, if you don't like it, stuff like that. And I'll be sure to send that on to the proper channels. And then the unireg feedback is due by the 1st, which will be my final day technically as a paid person. So that'll be fun. Tomorrow there's a BOT meeting via Zoom at 8 a.m. It's my final BOT meeting, so bittersweet moment. Looked over the agenda, not a whole lot of crazy stuff going on, but if there's anything to report, I'll be sure to report that back to y'all. Working on my transition document. For those of you who aren't aware really what those are, it's basically for the executive branch positions. It's a chance to kind of have a document saying what you did that year, kind of what your job description is and your roles and stuff like that. Mine will probably be a lot more lengthy than past presidents just because there's a lot of crazy things that happened, and I'm going to write it with the possibility that the next president might not be on campus until fall or even after. So it's going to be really lengthy in that sense to kind of help guide what I can't do in terms of helping them transition in person. So that'll be fun. Currently reviewing applications for the ASUW Leadership Scholarship. The only ones we're able to review at the moment are the high school student ones. There's a high school student application as well as UW students. The UW students is closed at the moment. We're working with YO scholarships to get that reopened so we can finish those reviews. There's like 77, I think, high school applicants. So checking through those, a lot of good candidates, and hopefully some of those people will be interested in joining First or Senate next year. Thursday, I will have a meeting with the Leadership and Academic Affairs. So that's a weekly meeting we've had with all the AVPs as well as Provost Miller. Just have a discussion with the 3 Senates, so Staff Senate, Faculty Senate, ASUW Senate, I guess technically, but myself. So if there's any questions you have regarding like academic affairs stuff, I know Senator Walsh reached out about some stuff. If there's anything like that that comes up on your radar, feel free to send that to me and I'll bring that up with the group. And then Advisor Lozano and I are working to formulate an email that will be sent out to students for elections to encourage them to participate and vote. And with that being said, make sure that you work with your constituents, reach out to them in any way you can to encourage them to also be involved. And then last thing I have is that on last Thursday, VP Howden and I and Advisor Lozano met with VP Chestnut and Dean O'Neill for our biweekly check-in with student affairs. So nothing super crazy in that, just some smaller discussions. Like I said, last week administration's kind of smoothing out a little bit. Not a whole lot of crazy things going on, which is good. But if you know of anything, if some students have reached out to you with some concerns or stuff like that, feel free to pass those on and I can make sure that that's sent up the proper channels. I will assure you that like faculty is very keen on making sure that their classes are built so students can succeed. So if you're in classes like that, or if you know people that are where the classes aren't, maybe we've gotten harder with going online, or if the way it's being taught isn't really working for you, definitely reach out to your faculty or your advisor or even an associate dean in your college and kind of make those concerns made. And that's all I have if there are any questions. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Chief of Legislative Affairs Hoverzon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a lot. Just a reminder that on Friday, legislation is due before 12:30 please let me know if you're planning on submitting it so we can get it on the agenda and stuff, because that'll be the last week for that we can submit legislation for that 2-week deadline. So it has 2 readings. I mean, technically we could submit it the next week and go through committee the whole, but I'd prefer if we could get it all in next week. But other than that, I don't really have a lot. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So for my report, just a few things. First, I was at the Lifesavers Coalition earlier this afternoon. And after this meeting, I can go ahead and circulate a list of resources that they've compiled for students and their mental health needs over the course of this extended off-campus education period. And then I also have a meeting with Julio Briones, who is one of the counselors at the Counseling Center, tomorrow afternoon to talk about an additional service that he wants to market to students as well. We had our first meeting back with the Cowboys Count Committee earlier last week, and we came to some really good conclusions on ways that we're going to be moving forward in terms of educating students about the census and the ways that they still need to fill out the census, especially for all students who are out of state at the moment. So we had institutional marketing come up with a flow chart that will be posted here soon. And then we're also hoping to get some of the Cowboy coffee slots. Those videos that get posted in the morning with hopefully some testimonials from students who are out. Yeah, and that is all I have at the moment. So Advisor Lozano.
Wanted to be sure and thank the members of the Elections Committee and Commissioner Porterfield. It's been a really unprecedented time, as we're all aware. That's probably been said too many times. But putting together this election has been a challenge, and the students that are serving in those roles have really stepped up and done a really good job of making sure that this election still takes place. So I wanted to thank everybody there. And then I just wanted to put on your radars that later tonight, Chief of Legislative Affairs Oversland will be sending out nomination forms for the ASUW Student Distinguished Service Award. Vice President Houghton will be putting together a group of folks to select you and recognizes people who a faculty member, a staff member, anybody in the Laramie community. And basically what you'll do if you want to nominate somebody for that is fill out the form, get it back to Vice President Houghton in time for his deadline, and then the committee will make a choice. So kind of a short timeline on that one. It sort of got pushed on the back burner with all the other things going on, but it's definitely something we want to keep doing. So start thinking about that so that maybe tonight or tomorrow morning you can send Vice President Houghton a nomination. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to ex officio reports, beginning with First Year Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The First Year Senate met earlier today and had first reading on the 2 pieces of legislation that are also up for first reading today. And other than that, we just discussed how to get people involved in First Year Senate for next year and what the rest of the year will look like for us and what legislation we might have in mind. And that's about all we did. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Non-traditional student council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a meeting last week and we ended up donating all of our Easter egg hunt items to the Laramie Foster Closet, who use those items to help 350 families throughout Laramie have a little happier Easter than they would have. So families who host foster kids, currently have foster kids, or kids who have been part of the foster system, all got a little something extra this year, thanks to all of us. And so even though we weren't able to have our Easter egg hunt on campus, we were still able to have a positive impact in the community. We also, due to everything going on, we are going to wait until the beginning of the next school year to have elections for a new executive committee for the non-trad student council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Staff Senate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nothing new to report, really, just continuing on with our committee meetings and and we are working on legislation for a resolution about food insecurity following ASUW's lead that you all set in the fall. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And finally, Student Athlete Advisory Committee.
Everything we're planning on doing is canceled. We're meeting next week to kind of see what we are going to do with the rest of the semester. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move on to committee reports, beginning with steering. So steering looked at the two pieces of legislation that we have up for first reading tonight and steered those to the correct committees. But then we also talked about our end of the year awards and then the presentation that steering is going to give to the Senate of the 108th administration for our first meeting. So just getting ready for that. Next, we have advocacy, diversity, and policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
Budget and planning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We met last Wednesday to discuss possible changes to the finance policy, and we will meet tomorrow to finalize those and hopefully get those submitted for legislation. Yeah, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Program and institutional development.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
RSO funding board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We met yesterday to also discuss some possible changes to the finance policy. So we'll be submitting some legislation this week, which y'all can look forward to next week. And that is all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Student outreach and programming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We briefly met and discussed the social media campaign. Please participate and tag #PokesItHome. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. For the Cowboys Count Committee, I already gave a majority of that report. Like I said, we had institutional marketing kind of rework a flow chart that determines whether or not students should be filling out the census at their, university town or back home. That was originally published by the Census Bureau. And then we're hoping to have some of our members of the committee, as well as other students on campus, participate in those Cowboy Coffee video slots that the university's been putting out every morning. So we're looking forward to that. And finally, the Elections Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This week, the Elections Committee met to discuss the virtual debate. We've been talking about it for a couple of days now and trying to figure out how we want to do it. We came to consensus on that. So submit some questions for the debate if you guys have any. Other than that, look for the ballot. We're not going to be able to do it tonight, but if you guys see any errors on there spelling-wise, anything like that, let me know, and we'll look at it next. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move on to college contact reports, beginning with agriculture and natural resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
Arts and sciences.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
College of Business.
Thank you, Sir Chair. No report.
And College of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
Engineering and Applied Sciences.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
College of Health Sciences.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
College of Law.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
And finally, School of Energy Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There is no old business. We can move straight on into new business with Senate Bill 2698, amendments to the ASUW Senatorial Scholarship for Spring 2020. Senator St. Marie, will you please proceed with the first reading?
Whereas the purpose of the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming ASUW student government is to serve our fellow students in the best manner possible, and whereas the Senatorial Scholarship has served as a means for recruitment and retention of people to fill seats on the ASUW Senate, and whereas many members of the ASUW Senate have showed dedication throughout these unprecedented times due to the global COVID-19 pandemic, and whereas these student representatives have shown a passion to live up to the ASUW student government's mission statement, as mentioned above, and whereas those students who have upheld their oath of office should be compensated fairly for this work they have done, and whereas the UW Board of Trustees and administration have made a decision to continue to pay their student employees, and whereas the executive branch of ASUW has continued to pay its student employees through the remainder of the 107th administration, and whereas there is no easy way for senators to complete their service hours or additional requirements to obtain the senatorial scholarship because they are predicted on the physical campus being open, whereas the money for this scholarship was allocated to the ASUW budget for fiscal year 2020, and whereas senators should still receive this money but now with new requirements to fit the new times. And whereas the payment of the scholarship would be based on the attendance of meetings of the full Senate, and whereas the payment of the scholarship would come at the end of the 107th administration before the end of the spring 2020 academic semester. Therefore, be it enacted by the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming, ASUW Student Government, that the amendments to Senate Bill number 2647, addendum shown in addendum A of this bill be adopted for the 2020 academic semester and the spring 2020 academic semester, and therefore be it further enacted that these amendments take effect immediately upon passage of this bill, and therefore be it further enacted that these amendments remain in effect until the end of fiscal year 2020.
Thank you. This bill was steered to steering and will be up for second and third reading next week. I will now move on to Senate Bill 2699, implementation of a land acknowledgement statement for ASUW Senate meetings. Senator St. Marie, will you please proceed with the first reading?
Whereas the purpose of the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming, ASUW student government is to serve our fellow students in the best manner possible. And whereas goal 2, quote, sense of community of the, quote, ASUW strategic plan moving forward 2018 to 2020, as shown in addendum A, could be addressed by the inclusion of a land acknowledgement statement at ASUW Senate meetings. And whereas inclusion of land acknowledgement statements is a way to promote community through cultural understanding by affirming the autonomy and well-being of indigenous. I totally lost my spot. Whereas land-grant universities have a history of disposing indigenous people from their land, and as a result, historical traumas continue to impact these communities and contribute to rampant disparities throughout Native populations across America, as referenced in Addendum B. Whereas many peer institutions, including Colorado State University, Montana State University, and the University of Colorado Boulder, have implemented institution-wide and student government-focused initiatives surrounding Indigenous land acknowledgement. Whereas a strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion for ASUW calls for internal diversity through legislation in collaboration with campus partners and groups as shown in Addendum C. And whereas campus programs and partners such as the Shepherd Symposium on Social Justice, Martin Luther King Jr. Days of Dialogue, and Keepers of the Fire have implemented a land acknowledgement statement into their events and programs like the one included in Addendum A. And whereas the University of Wyoming occupies the land of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Shoshone, and Crow peoples, along with other Native tribes that call the Great Basin and Rocky Mountain region home. And whereas land acknowledgement should be meaningful practice with appreciation and gratitude to the original inhabitants and their sacrifices made for the land, and are transformative acts that undo Indigenous erasure as referenced in Addendum B, and therefore be it enacted that the ASUW rules and procedures be amended to reflect the changes in Addendum E, and therefore be it further enacted that upon passage, this bill will take effect at the start of the fiscal year 2021.
Thank you. This bill was triple steered to advocacy, diversity, and policy, steering, and student outreach and programming. So please have your committee recommendations ready for next week, where they will be up for second and third readings. That is the end of new business. We can move on to announcements. If anyone has any announcements, just press the raise your hand button, I guess. Senator Hoffman.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind budget and planning people to show up to our Zoom meetings if at all possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements this evening? Okay. We can now move on to processing if there are any comments under processing. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. We look forward to seeing you next week. And this meeting is adjourned.